One group had to live as if they were back in the 1950s. So they had to imagine they were back in that time as they were back then 20 years earlier. And then there was another group who spent time in the same environment, but they were reminiscing. Oh, isn't it nice to be back in an environment that looks like it was 20 years ago? And then they compared the two groups, and the group that were living as if they were 20 years earlier had improvements in blood markers, grip strength, elements of cognitive function. They had almost thought themselves younger.
Hello, everyone. This is Larry Weeks, and welcome to another episode of Bounce. My guest today is neuroscientist Dr. Tommy Wood. Tommy is an associate professor of pediatrics and neuroscience at the University of Washington, biochemistry from Cambridge, with a medical degree from Oxford and a PhD from Oslo. He's also the head scientist for motorsport at Hintsa Performance, where he keeps multiple Formula One drivers very, very sharp. And he's the chief science officer at the brain health company Better Brain. Holy cow, is this guy a slacker or what? He is also the author of the best-selling book, The Stimulated Mind, Future-Proof Your Brain from Dementia and Stay Sharp at Any Age, which is the focus of this particular episode. And in this conversation, Tommy dispels the myth that the brain is doomed to decline with age. His thesis is that by providing the right stimulus and building more headroom, as he calls it, the amount of mental function we have available to us, Tommy explains that even if we can't stop the pathology of an aging brain, we can build a brain resilient enough to withstand it. So in this episode, we talk about all of that. We discuss the fascinating counterclockwise study. We talk about what different challenges, both physical and mental, actually do to your brain. I ask him about the work age cutoff. I use Joe Biden as my plank. We discuss two common conditions most people ignore that are tied to dementia risk, what the usual brain diet advice gets wrong. Should you get tested early for dementia markers? I ask him some questions geared toward caregivers. We even talk about brain games and crossword puzzles. There's a lot more here that I think you'll not only enjoy, but I think you'll find interesting and very, very helpful. So without further ado, let's get into it. Here's Dr. Tommy Wood. Tommy, thank you so much for coming on the show. Welcome.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Where are you currently?
I'm in Seattle.
I love Seattle when the sun is out. I spent 3 months there. I was right there by Redmond, and then I would go across the water to downtown. I loved it. Somebody told me Seattle has the record for lost sunglasses or some stat like that.
Oh, really?
But people buy them and then they never use them and then they lose. So I thought it was weird. All right, let's get into it. So I've got an odd question. Maybe you're half Icelandic. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
So that explains the Norway PhD and probably the strongman competitions. But I'm a huge Game of Thrones fan, so forgive me. But you know the mountain, and you met him in his gym in Reykjavik?
It was about 18 months ago. We have some mutual friends. So I hung out with him in Thor's power gym in Reykjavik for a morning. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Is he just enormous?
He is 6'8" and 440 pounds. It's just, so in this photo, I'm taking a selfie, but he's so far above me and he's just clearly double my size. He's literally a mountain.
He's a mountain.
Yeah.
You also involved or co-founded, I don't know, the Better Brain coaching. I didn't do much investigation, but I want to use it. I want me and my wife to go in and use it. And I'll include some of this in the show notes. And I was looking at it right before we came on. That's coaching. Is it a process where you get some blood work or some other test, and then it lays out some protocols for you? Is that right?
Essentially, yes. Better Brain I didn't found the company. Initially, I was a scientific advisor, and then now I'm the chief science officer. It has two broad parts. So one is this platform that's been built largely based on AI, but with the grounding of thousands of papers that I helped to curate. So that there's actually a fully free version where you go on and you can put in information like it could be blood test results, it could be diet, physical activity, information about yourself, and then it will help build you and coach you through what we call the self-directed version, which is here are some of the things that you are most likely to benefit you in terms of your brain health and dementia risk. And then there is also a coached version where we have human coaches. All the coaches are registered dietitians. You can get some blood tests, which cover the most important evidence-based markers for dementia and cognitive decline. And the health coaching is covered by health insurance. So most people don't pay for the coaching at all. There's the free self-directed version, or if you do the human coaching, most people is covered by insurance.
That's very cool. So you don't have to have blood work. You can
No.
still maybe take some history and genetic factors or whatever, family history.
Yeah. All of that can be part of it. And you can either do the AI version or you can do the human coached version. Yeah.
This is timely because there's family and we're probably proxy for many millions of people, and then I have friends. We were helping a friend of ours, her sister, move in to a new place. She's having cognitive issues, and my wife's mother. So there's all these questions, and you go down rabbit holes. The book was really great. I'm going to push people to the book. I want to salt their curiosity to read it because I don't want this to cover everything in the book. I think the general thesis is that it's not a predetermined path that you're going to have cognitive decline. You have more power than we may think.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it started out with a fascinating case study or some research that was done, the counterclockwise study.
Yeah.
It may not have started there, but it captured my attention. This was a study done in the 70s, I believe, right? And they replicated someplace in the 50s. Were they in the 60s, 70s? 70s,
yeah, they're in their 70s, largely, yeah.
And they put them in this location where they replicated everything from the 50s, but they had to act like they were there back in that time. They had to carry their own bags there. They had to act like their younger selves. And there were some remarkable effects on their cognition and some of the blood markers.
You're right. And so there were two groups in this study. So in the first group, so they have this, they set things up like it's 1950s peak Cold War kind of time. And one group had to do, as you said, they had to live as if they were back in the 1950s. They had to talk about current events as if they were happening right now, right? So they had to imagine they were back in that time as they were back then 20 years earlier. And then there was another group who spent time in the same environment, but they were reminiscing. Oh, isn't it nice to be back in an environment that looks like it was 20 years ago? And then they compared the two groups, and the group that were living as if they were 20 years earlier had improvements in blood markers, grip strength, elements of cognitive function. They had almost thought themselves younger. This was the core output of the counterclockwise study. And then Ellen Langer wrote a book about it called Counterclockwise. And they're replicating the study now with more modern techniques and things like that. So I'm hoping to expand on that.
And then I went down another rabbit hole. There's some place where this is set up somewhere in Europe, I think. There's a village where I think they call it Dementia Village or Alzheimer, where they actually have this facility set up where older people with dementia can go and live. It's fascinating. What's interesting here, and maybe this is where we can jump off into your book and your thesis here, is that beliefs act as biological signals. Is it your thesis that we can talk to our brains through our behavior? Is this thing like a self-fulfilling prophecy, how we look at aging and brain health and cognition, this feedback loop?
I think so. And on multiple levels, potentially. So
please, yeah.
The one that sort of like directly relates to this, and a lot of it does come from work by people like Ellen Langer, is that there's this idea called stereotype embodiment theory, where if we have some preconceived notions of what it means to get older or to age, then we will act along the lines of what we expect. And then that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So the easiest way to think about it is if I expect that aging will come with a loss of physical and cognitive function, I am more likely to not do the things that will help me maintain cognitive and physical function. I'm going to think, oh, I'm too old to learn that. I'm too old to lift that. I'm too old to do that. Or I can't do that because I'm older. And it's actually the lack of engagement in those activities, and they could be physical activities, cognitive activities, learning new languages, going out and meeting new people. The lack of that engagement and stimulus will then accelerate decline. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Another interesting area, particularly as we think about longevity, is that there are some studies that show that the less positively we perceive the process of aging, the higher our risk of death. There are studies where they look up and say, how do you feel about aging? Where they ask them questions like, how much do you agree with the statement, as I get older, I'm going to get less useful or I'm going to become useless? And people who feel like aging involves a loss of function or they don't feel positive about aging those people tend to have worse long-term health outcomes. And some of it could be because you're already feeling some of the effects of aging and they're less positive about it. But some of it will also be because you're less likely to engage in all these activities that we know can help to maintain function as we get older.
I also think, based on that and other things as I read this book, that I think you argue that humans are biologically capable of remaining cognitively functional well into their 70s and 80s. And we're going to talk about this in a minute, but you explicitly challenge the modern concept of retirement, but we'll get into that. Is that right? Am I?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I listen to these other podcasts, and I'm in podcasts, and I've had guests on who have podcasts, and I think you do too. But I was listening to one podcast, it was a business podcast, but they're talking about Joe Biden, and they're talking about Congress and congressmen. And this guy was like, he shall remain nameless, but they need to leave. They're too old. They just need, get out of the way. Adamant. And I get it. So I'm reading your book. I'm listening to this. What if some of these people are very vibrant still? You can't know that from the outside. I think that's the big, except, and then again, he mentions Biden, and we all remember the debate and all that. And so part of it, you're like, okay, when is the cutoff point? So, because I do read conflicting research papers on this, and they always talk about a tipping point after some age, certain biological markers start declining or degrading. Anyway, I just threw a soup at you. So
I do appreciate it, and I do understand this. And actually, so on the podcast that I have with my colleague Josh Turkner, who's a neurologist, we actually, well before the previous presidential election, we talked a little bit about this because both candidates were certainly of advanced age, and it was certainly a question. And I think that, and this is obviously the case in the Senate. I don't know what the average age is, but there's a lot of older individuals. And I don't think there's some fixed age where we can say, oh, now function will be lost and this person can no longer do their job. But there are two separate questions here, really, because one is what's best for the individual. It's definitely better for the individual they don't have to remain employed, but really remaining cognitively engaged. They're contributing to something, they're doing work, they're learning, they're challenging themselves still, because we know that helps to maintain function. But equally, that doesn't necessarily mean that's best for their state or for their politics, right? So
their job.
Even their job, exactly.
Or how effective they are in a job.
Exactly. And so I would certainly say any politician who we think is too old to do the job, I would still want them to be active doing something for themselves. We cannot prevent the aging process entirely. And at some point, you may no longer have the function at the level that you want to for your job. There's a big part of this too, which is that, yes, these jobs are very cognitively demanding, which I think is a good thing in most settings. But equally, the life of a politician is not necessarily conducive to great cognitive health, right? They travel a lot. They don't sleep much. They're not necessarily doing much physical activity. They're not necessarily eating while you're at dinners where you're maybe eating too much, drinking too much, right? And so I think that may be contributing here
and
as
it's
well.
The whole body-mind thing that's sleep and eating and travel. This may be counter to the whole thing, but if you were on some congressional panel and they said, hey, what should be the cutoff point for a president? Can I get say you, Dr. Tommy Wood?
So generally, there are examples in politics where people are still active and engaged and doing a good job into their 80s and 90s in the US and in other countries.
I want to run for mayor in a few years. So
yeah. So I genuinely wouldn't give you an answer. But what I would say, and I think that this is relevant to all of us, is I think that one of the issues we have in terms of assessing cognition overall is that right now, nobody tests your brain until they think you have a problem. Compare that to if you go to your doctor for an annual checkup, they'll test your blood pressure. They don't think you have high blood pressure, but they'll track it over time. And so if you do get high blood pressure, they know your history, and then you can start to address it. So one thing that I think could be important, and this is starting to change, and this is something that we do through Better Brain and we'll do more of, is just start to take a baseline, measure lots of different aspects of cognition, and then we know what's normal for you, and then we can track that over time so we can start to see when it changes. So that
it's very individual. Very individual.
Yeah, and it's very individual, right? And most people, it's funny because I work with a lot of high performance professional athletes. When you do cognitive function tests on them, they're like, I expect to be the 99th percentile on everything. But actually, for core functions of your brain, have working memory? Can you manipulate things in your head? Can you rotate things visually? Can you react to things quickly? Can you process information? Most people, you just want to be average and you want to stay average for 9 decades. But the only way that you know how you're doing compared to you is to have some baseline testing. So what I would say is I would have an advanced cognitive testing for individuals in these powerful positions throughout their careers so that we can detect when changes are starting to happen. And then we might think now's potentially the time to move on to something else.
I like it. And when they call you in front of Congress, this is the answer you should. No, because you're right. I didn't think of the presidential office as, I'm thinking of it as somebody sitting in a chair thinking through things. That's not the job. It is meetings and flying, and it's very physical as well as, so yeah, okay. But I play tennis. I play a lot of tennis. I play singles, but I'm very encouraged when I'm playing, when I look over and I see some 70, 80-year-old guys. Well, let me just say 80-year-old guys, they're playing doubles. They had to progress out of singles, but I'm like, hey, oh my gosh, I don't have to stop.
Yeah.
It's going to change. So how do we do this, Tommy? How do we age well cognitively? What I took away from the book is, it's writ large in the title, The Stimulated Mind, is that you need challenge. And it looks like that challenge can take the form of physical exercise, cognitive stimulation, all these things. In fact, I kind of took away the benefit of hard things.
Yeah.
Things that you would normally avoid, or it seems wrong because it's so hard that, hey, I shouldn't be struggling. There's benefit in that. And that was comforting because there's a lot of things cognitively I struggle with. It reframed frustration for me. It's like, you know what? Maybe the frustrating things, depending on what they are, there's some benefit in that. So don't just give up.
Yeah.
Am I on the right track?
Absolutely. And the simple way to think about it is that really challenging ourselves, and that can be physical challenge, it can be cognitive challenge. Sometimes it can even be social challenge, right? Having to interact with people who think differently from us, right? In some way, it's stressful in terms of it activates all these processes. And what stress is supposed to do is it drives adaptation, right? The stress response is there to tell your body there's a difference between what we need to be able to do or deal with and what we're capable of dealing with. It's like there's a disturbance in our environment that we have to adapt to. And it diverts resources for us to adapt to that. And that's why challenge feels uncomfortable, right? Because you're activating these responses. But that's a good thing, because when you do that, you build capacity, and that could be cognitive capacity, that could be physical capacity. And one thing that we resist as adults compared to kids, I think one of the reasons why we often think, oh, kids can learn things so easily and adults really struggle to learn, or the adult brain is fixed, it can't learn new things, it can't get better with age. Most of that isn't true. And one of the reasons for that, I think, is societal, which is that, and individual, but it's that adults hate being bad at stuff. We hate that feeling of trying and failing, or especially if we make mistakes in front of other people.
Because you feel like a kid. You feel, okay.
Or you feel like an amateur. Like you feel like you don't know what you're doing. You think other people are going to judge you because you're making mistakes. But actually, it's that engagement in something new and challenging and failing and then overcoming it. That process is really what builds capacity in whatever field it is you're working in. So one thing that I hope people can take away is that they feel a little more willing to put themselves out there, challenge themselves, get frustrated, fail, push themselves a little bit more, learn over time, because that's really, when it comes down to it, that's what's building structure and function in the brain.
You've done research that this is a direct benefit to the brain and neuroplasticity. So let me ask you, I'll give you a real case. I have a friend, he's a wealthy, accomplished guy. He's in his 50s, but he's not tech savvy. He's got other super skills, but he was going ballistic over the frustration of technology and what he was doing with his computer, to the point he called me to get some help, but he didn't want to deal with it because he didn't know a lot of things. And I was wondering at the time, let me ask you, if he took that frustration and said, okay, I don't know what's going on, but I can learn this and push through it. There's benefit in that to his brain, right?
Yes.
And by the way, he had all the time in the world. This wasn't under crunch,
Yeah.
But I was thinking, okay, here's a perfect example where the frustration could be a signal of, hey, here's something beneficial if you have the time to dig into it.
That's absolutely true. And there could have been
Because
a
he
scenario.
felt everything you said. He felt everything.
Yeah.
He felt like an amateur.
Yeah. There's definitely a scenario where he just needed to get something done, right? And he couldn't do it and get somebody else to do it. That's fine. But if you have the time, and this is, especially if this is a skill that you want or need in the future, which is, I imagine, probably using these technologies is going to be important if he's going to continue to work for another 10, 20 years, then yes, it's frustrating to start. But that process of learning these skills is critical to building and maintaining brain health and function. And there are even studies that show he wouldn't count yet if he's in his 50s, but adults in their 60s and 70s, those who are more familiar with technology and use more technology platforms, have more technology related skills, actually have a lower risk of dementia. And that's probably because later in life, they've engaged in learning these things. They didn't grow up with them, but they had to force themselves to learn it. And then that's resulted in potentially some improved cognition later on.
That is very interesting. Did not know that. That's great. In regards to challenge, learning, so some of the things seem obvious, or maybe I've just read them so many times in various papers or books, but things that are novel, you experience, that's beneficial for the brain, learning new skills, learning generally. Is there any difference in reading, let's say fiction, nonfiction, from a standpoint of benefit to the brain, from a stimulus standpoint? Obviously, I would think if you're learning something, but I don't know, and maybe I'm parsing something shouldn't be parsed.
So in general,
by the way, let me go in further. Is reading better than listening?
It's a great question. Obviously, we have more historical studies on reading because podcasts and audiobooks and things are relatively more recent compared to physical books. In general, people who read more tend to have better cognitive function later in life and a lower risk of dementia. Of course, there are other things going on there, right? Reading isn't the different types of people read more. And if you have better cognitive function, you're more likely to continue reading later in life, right? So there's things going in both directions. But there are some studies that suggest that a lot of the benefit of reading from a cognitive standpoint comes from the way that you engage in the material. So if you're just reading and it's just going in and you're not really thinking about it, maybe that's having less of a benefit. But if you're having an opportunity to really think about it, this could be fiction and you're talking about it in a book club, for example, because then you're actually engaging in the material and thinking about what you can get from it. Or this could be nonfiction, it could be informational, and then you're applying it in the work that you're doing. I think all of that is beneficial, and probably one's not better than the other, as long as you're like really engaged in the material. Studies that compare listening versus reading suggest that similar regions of the brain are being activated with both activities. So actually, if you prefer the audio version, do that. The main caveat is that if you're doing the audio version, it's more likely that you're going to be doing other things and you're not going to be paying attention. So it's really that engagement with the material that's important, less so whether it's ears or eyes that are mediating the information coming in.
I read something about the importance of hearing, long-term effects on dementia. Is that a thing?
Yes.
If somebody has impaired hearing, a hearing aid is critical to maintain cognitive health over the long period. Is that right?
Yes. So both hearing loss and vision loss are now considered well-evidenced risk factors for cognitive decline and dementia. And with the studies we have so far, that risk seems to be reversible. So if you have age-related hearing loss or any kind of hearing loss, and this is specifically for people who could hear and then lost their hearing. If you were congenitally deaf, you interact with the world in other ways. And so the hearing doesn't play the same role. But if you have hearing loss, particularly if you're at a higher risk for dementia, either you're older, you have cardiovascular disease, some other things, that risk is mitigated or reversed if you get a hearing aid because you return that sense. And the same for eyesight, particularly cataracts. So if you have cataracts, you have an increased risk of dementia. If you have cataract surgery, that risk is reversed. And in both settings, it's probably partly there's less inputs coming into the brain and like the brain decreases function as a result. But I think the biggest reason is that if you can no longer hear or see as well, you don't interact with the world in the same way. You don't go out as much. You don't go and do things, see other people, right? Fewer opportunities for challenge. You're not driving, you're not traveling, or maybe not as much as you used to. So I think it's allowing yourself to continue to engage in the world in the same way. And so if you do have loss of a sense, and this kind of goes to some of those ideas of aging we had earlier, often
Yes,
people,
the beliefs.
we resist hearing aids because you're like, oh, if I need a hearing aid, I'm old. But actually, I would encourage you, if you need it, get it, because it's going to help you continue to do all these things that are going to be beneficial.
It also ties into what you said earlier about your beliefs. If they're restrictive, oh, I shouldn't be doing stuff, you're going to engage less.
Yeah.
And that overall means your mind is less stimulated, your brain. And so it's not engaged and thus more apt to decline. So if I don't hear, then I just stop engaging with the world because I can't hear or having conversations. These things are compounding behaviors, aren't they?
Yeah,
it's just,
absolutely.
This is bad, but then because it's bad, you take this action, this behavior that's bad. Now you've compounded. That's interesting and helpful. So I wanted to talk about Alzheimer's and dementia. Now, when I was little, my grandfather had, I guess it was Alzheimer's, but I remember my father calling it dementia. And it was very late. He was 90, what have you. I think you make the case in the book that we've conflated those two, or should they be parsed? Should there be dementia and Alzheimer's? I think the point in the book was that everything is now bucketed as Alzheimer's when maybe it shouldn't, but I'm not sure.
Just to step back for a second first, I'll
Please.
just define dementia, which is essentially a clinical diagnosis where an individual has lost enough cognitive function such that they can't look after themselves on a day-to-day. They can't do the regular activities of daily living. And there are multiple types of or causes of dementia. And Alzheimer's disease is the most common. It makes up something like 60 to 80% of cases of dementia. Then vascular dementia. So this is the blood vessels being the primary issue in the brain that's tied very much to heart disease risk factors, because what's happening to vessels in the heart to cause heart disease is also happening to vessels in the brain. And then there's other types like frontotemporal dementia and Lewy body dementia, but they're less common. And those first two make up something like 70 to 90% of cases of dementia. And some good proportion of those are thought to be preventable based on some of the stuff that we're talking about today. The main kind of contention around Alzheimer's disease, some of it is just intellectually interesting, and some of it could be holding us back in terms of prevention and treatment. And so the first is that what Alzheimer studied, Alois Alzheimer, the psychiatrist, was very rare cases of early onset dementia, which is not what we call Alzheimer's disease today. And so we've bucketed a large group of individuals who experience cognitive decline, who have accumulation of proteins in the brain that look very similar to the cases that Alzheimer studied, even though they were different. And we've just called all of it Alzheimer's disease. And some of it is absolutely the same thing happening. But when neurologists talk about treating Alzheimer's patients, they say that once you've seen one patient with Alzheimer's, you've seen one patient with Alzheimer's, because they're all so different. And when you then look at their brains after death, their brains look very different too. And how their brains look don't necessarily directly relate to how their brains functioned in real life. So the fact that we've lumped everything together and just focused on proteins that accumulate in the brain, particularly amyloid and tau, the field is now starting to appreciate that it's just more complicated than that. It's probably a confluence of multiple factors, and it's how those different factors interact in different people on top of their genetics and other things that kind of results in a different trajectory. So
and lifestyle,
it could be lifestyle plays a huge role here.
I think you said there are people who have died who are fine cognitively, well into their 90s, who have the markers of Alzheimer's. They have the plaque, amyloid, what have you. So it's not just disease, but it's resilience. There's some brains that are more resilient than others. And is that what you're saying is partly lifestyle, that you can function better depending on how you're living your life and being stimulated or engaged?
Absolutely. So from multiple angles. So one is, yes, your lifestyle affects whether that accumulation of pathology like amyloid, the plaques, affects your cognition. It also affects whether amyloid accumulates in the first place. And then there are other factors, measures of inflammation in the brain. So neuroinflammation, which is as the brain responds to things like amyloid accumulating, that's influenced by lifestyle and the environment as well. And there are other measures that seem to change with or without amyloid accumulating. But lifestyle and the environment seem to influence all of those. So yes, I think we're going to do a better job of developing therapies and drugs to affect that pathway. I'm very hopeful that we will. But based on what we know right now, there's a huge amount that we can do on the lifestyle front to affect that trajectory, regardless of where we are on it.
Okay. Let's talk about that. It seems to me there's more and more literature coming out and information around the benefits of exercise, that it's not just, it's all the same thing. I was going to say it's not just physical, but everything's physical, but it can slow the degradation or the issues with dementia, or it can help with cognitive aging. It's very good for the brain. I think that's out in the cultural jet stream. I think we know that. Is there a better form of exercise? Does it matter specifically for the brain, cognitive function?
So we now know that like different types of exercise have different effects on different parts of the brain and different cognitive functions. So the ideal scenario is that you do a little bit of all of the above, though you can be efficient in that. There are studies that show that, so say older adults who are previously sedentary, they start a brisk walking program. So they walk for 40 minutes, 3 times a week for a year. That significantly improved the volume of the hippocampus, a part of the brain really important for memory, and made them fitter, and their memory improved.
It increased the volume of the hippocampus.
Yeah, so their brain got bigger in an area that typically at that age only gets smaller. So this was over a year.
Over a year.
So they got bigger by sort of 1 to 2% when they would expect to decrease by 1 to 2% in that kind of age. So like so the gap is even bigger, 2 to 4%.
And how beneficial is that to cognitive decline or preventing it?
Yeah, so that decline, and not even necessarily just with dementia, but just with cognitive decline with age, which can happen even if you don't end up with dementia. Part of that happens like a 1 to 2% per year, because we know that just not having enough hippocampus is going to then eventually relate to having lower cognitive function. But they performed better on cognitive function tests as well. So not only was the brain structure changing, but its function was changing too. And similar studies have basically shown that on that spectrum, from brisk walking up to high intensity interval training, if you do that regularly, you have better hippocampal structure and function and better memory. So aerobic and sprint and intense exercise in that spectrum, particularly good for memory. Resistance training is really good for an area of or parts of the brain that we call the white matter, which is in the middle part of the brain, and it's responsible for all our fast connections. And so studies, again, in similar groups, individuals in their 60s and 70s, they do a very typical basic resistance training program 2 times a week, 5 or 6 machines in the gym, like multi-joint, like a leg press and a chest press and a pull down shoulder press. They do 3 sets of 8 to 12 repetitions twice a week, 6 months, significant changes in the white matter and improvements in things like executive function and decision making. So we know that what you want to do some kind of cardio type exercise 2 or 3 times a week, maybe resistance training once or twice a week. And you can layer on the last piece, which is a coordinative movement. So now we're talking tennis, martial arts, ball sports, board sports, team sports, where you have this additional requirement to learn a complex skill. And then also you're responding to the environment, you're reacting to where the ball is going, you're strategizing about moving your opponent around the court so you can get the ball past them. And it's that kind of rapid information processing, often in a social environment, that seems to have additional benefits. So there are studies that compare like dancing to circuit training, and they're both beneficial for the brain, but dancing is better. And they've compared table tennis to cycling. And again, table tennis, because it's got all those complex movements, seems to have this additional benefit. So for your cardio type exercise and more intense type exercise there, I would instead when you can, try and do some kind of new sport, because then you're getting those additional inputs.
That's the learning function?
Yes.
Again, I'm challenging my brain. And by the way, I want to emphasize this over and over, is that the brain only responds based on the challenge, right? You really got to push it. Is that right? Okay.
Yes.
This is the whole deal. This is the whole deal.
This is the whole deal. So, but you don't have to give up tennis and learn something new. You can
I'll just hit with my left hand when I'm a right hand.
You can continue to play tennis, but it's just as much as you're able, keep working to build skills. And then on top of that, you're getting all the physical activity benefits as well.
I'm happy to hear you mentioned ping pong, right? Table tennis. If I have to, I can step down. So, and the whole deal is pushing, learning, challenge. One thing that was a little confused, you said we're understimulated and overstimulated.
Yeah.
I don't understand the overstimulate. Overstimulation bad? What does that mean? Does that mean I'm just distracted? I'm scrolling on my phone, or I'm focusing on being understimulated. Is it bad to be overstimulated?
Yeah. So the reason why, and so this is a phrase that I use in the book that you're bringing up, there's this feeling that I say several times that we need more cognitive stimulation, but it's very common for me to hear people say, I already feel overstimulated, right? And for the reasons that you mentioned, that they're overworked, they're constantly task
And I feel they'll
switching,
use that excuse
multitasking.
to not challenge the brain, but
Yeah.
they're going to say they're already challenged. Their brain's already.
Yeah. So that's essentially it, is that the modern work environment and technology environment, right? You're scrolling on Instagram while you're watching Netflix. It can be such that you're constantly getting this sort of low level stimulation that you never really recover from. I mean, it's inherently stressful being in a Zoom meeting while you're trying to do your email, and then you're thinking about the things that you haven't done yet. And then when you get home, you're constantly jumping back and forth between the emails still coming in and you're trying to watch Netflix and you're scrolling on Instagram. That's what I mean by overstimulation. And what happens is two things. One is you never get the time to really dedicate to focus on doing high quality work or challenging your brain. And your brain never gets a break. Because even just this sort of constant stream of all these kinds of things, you need a break in order to get the mental energy to really engage in hard cognitive work. So
that's one of the pillars of your framework.
Yeah.
Support.
Which includes, so particularly sleep, but then also just breaks during the day. If you do hard cognitive work, you need even just a few minutes. We know that just a few minutes is enough for people to feel re-energized and able to go back again.
To get all the framework, everybody. But okay, that's helpful because that can be junk foodish. Like
yes,
an email from a colleague. I'm not doing deep thinking. It's something I got to do and read it, and I may be skimming half of it, but then I go jump over here and
it distracted you from the thing that you were trying to do. So then it's stressful because, exactly.
So I get it, but I'm not really engaged. My brain is not focused. And okay, let's talk retirement real quickly because I got listeners in their 40s and 50s, some in their 60s. I'm sure they worked hard. They're dreaming of the day they slow down. But your data says that dream may be quietly dangerous for their brain, I think. Tell me your view of retirement and sitting on the beach I don't know. I like sitting on the beach.
Me too.
I mean, but I need to be engaged. Is golf not enough? Help me parse this.
Yes. So there are several sort of large epidemiological observational studies that suggest that retirement is the point at which cognitive decline most rapidly accelerates in older adults. And there are also some studies that show that older adults who retire and then who choose to go back to work, actually, it helps them maintain cognitive function. Now, I think that it's now generally accepted this is because the modern work environment is where we get most of our social and cognitive stimulation, right? This is where we solve problems, we learn new things, right? We're engaged. And when we remove that stimulus, we tend to see cognitive function decline as a result because we're not continuing to challenge ourselves. So this doesn't mean that you can't retire. It just means that you have to find a way to continue to be engaged and learn and challenged and stimulated in retirement. So it could take multiple forms. Join a book club, volunteer there's actually some very nice data on volunteering because this is contributing to something outside of yourself, pro-social behavior, very good for health and cognition. It could be tennis. It could be golf.
So
it could be learning
any kind of project
language
that is engaging and I have to think about and work toward or master or figure out.
Yeah, so one of the landmark studies of this was published in 2003 in the New England Journal of Medicine, where they looked at hobbies and activities in individuals who were retired and looked at their risk of dementia. And basically they found that people who were doing 1, 2, 3 different kind of activities a day had the lowest risk of dementia. And that includes reading a book, going and playing a sport, going to a dance class, going to a lecture.
But they varied. They were different.
Yeah.
Three different. Okay.
So they didn't have to do tens of things, but they had 2 or 3 things that they regularly did that were cognitively stimulating, and they did those every day or regularly during the week.
Okay. Anything I should not be eating right now if I want to make sure my cognitive is that. I don't know how much of a factor that is, but I figure alcohol is probably not great based on the science to date. But let's just food. Is there something that you would not eat?
There's nothing that I wouldn't eat occasionally. Genuinely. So what I actually prefer to focus on is what you should eat more of rather than what you should eat less of.
Okay.
Because this idea of eating less of stuff just feels very punitive
I love
and it
it.
often makes it very difficult. So I would eat more seafood. I would eat more berries and colorful fruits and veggies. I would eat more things that have a good amount of fiber in. Beans, whole grains. I'd eat more fermented things. It could be fermented dairy, like yogurt, kefir. I'm from Iceland, so I eat skyr, kimchi, sauerkraut, that kind of stuff. Then from there, if you can get a blood test, we know there are some nutrient markers that are linked to risk of cognitive decline and dementia, and that are reversible if we address those nutrient insufficiencies. So the vitamin D, which you can get from seafood, you can get from fortified dairy, you could take it as a supplement, you could go out in the sun. Omega-3 fatty acids, so seafood is critical. Vitamins, particularly the B vitamins that affect a marker called homocysteine, which goes up when you don't have enough of those B vitamins. And those B vitamins are B12, folate, B6, and riboflavin. 12, riboflavin you get from things like meat, organ meats, liver, folate from green leafy vegetables. And then iron is another one. And again, if you need more iron, red meat is the most bioavailable source. Not everybody needs a lot of it. Some people might need more. And so you can supplement with it, of course, if you need to. So some basic testing can be helpful in deciding, do I need to eat more of this specific food based on a nutrient it contains? But I also, if you're not getting enough from your diet, I would advocate for a supplement, just because we know we have some pretty good evidence that maintaining status is important.
Would you recommend somebody get a blood test for potential dementia markers? Because some people are scared. Some people are like, okay, some people are afraid to know because they're not sure how much power they have to affect the outcome. What say you?
So you're
a scientist, so I think more information, the better, the more data, the better.
So sometimes, and there are people who don't want to know their genetic risk, they don't want to know their risk markers,
because I'm also thinking about the belief part of it. I'm thinking what we talked at the first thing is, okay, if I believe I'm going to degrade, does that,
and it can also be
placebo.
If you know that you're at higher risk, for some people that's inherently stressful, and we know that those kind of chronic stressors are bad, right? So maybe for them it's better to avoid that information. That's fine. It's about a third. A third of people don't want to know, a third don't really care, a third do want to know, something like that. But the markers that are currently available, and there are some FDA sort of approved markers, and they're really to take a blood test and they correlate with whether you have a lot of pathology on a brain scan, amyloid or tau. And these are the ratio of amyloid beta 42 to 40 in the blood, and then a tau marker called p-tau 217. And we do use these. People can get access to them. They do predict some degree your risk of dementia or having these pathology. They're really predicting pathology on the brain scan, but they also predict later risk of dementia because those things are obviously related. But the question that I would ask is, what are you going to do with that information?
Yeah, if you're not going to do anything, why do the test?
Why would you? Yeah,
exactly. Or you don't think you will stick to some plan.
So for some people, it can be motivating. They're like, I'm more likely to do the things that I'm going to recommend anyway. But I'm going to, regardless of what your levels are, I would suggest as much as you can, you address the risk factors you've talked about. So you should get your blood pressure checked and your cholesterol checked and address heart disease and prediabetes. And you should sleep more and you should take up tennis and you shouldn't drink more than a couple of drinks a week. And I'm going to tell you that regardless of what the level of the marker is. So it all comes down to what information people will find useful to then address those things we're talking about.
Right. What do you drink, Tommy? Do you have a cocktail? Do you have a cocktail?
Oh, yeah. So come on. I really like my go-to would often be a Manhattan. So I like a margarita too. Margarita is my wife's favorite, but I prefer a mezcal.
Tequila drinks.
So I'm a big fan of mezcal. So margarita made with mezcal. That's
so it destroys. I do track my sleep. Now wine is worse. Tequila drinks not so much, but it will. It affects my deep sleep. So I don't drink a lot at all. But okay, you're living your life. You say, and I wrote this down. I think you said that it's not too late to improve cognitive health. Is that right? Even if you have dementia or you've been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, are you suggesting there's still actions you can take that maybe the path is you're already down the road, but there's still things to improve your cognitive health or at least mitigate how further down the path you go?
There's two camps here, both of which I think are right to a degree. So like I'm right down the middle and I'll explain what I mean by that. So like some people do believe that if you do like a full battery of interventions, and that includes supplements and exercise and diet and all this other kind of stuff, they would say that you could reverse dementia, right? For somebody who had dementia no longer has it. Right now, that's quite controversial. And there's just like a couple of small trials. It's not generally accepted. I believe we could get there one day, although I wouldn't say that we know that we can reverse Alzheimer's disease or dementia. However, there are lots of studies that show that you can improve symptoms and improve health and quality of life in individuals who, even if they're already experiencing cognitive decline and dementia. So if you improve their diet or you add physical activity, you improve their vascular health. And there are studies that have done this in individuals with mild cognitive impairment, early stages of Alzheimer's, some improvements in cognition. That doesn't mean you can say that Alzheimer's has been reversed, but you can definitely still improve cognition and quality of life, even if some decline or diagnosis of dementia has already been made. So yes, if the main struggle is that once significant decline has occurred, it's often just harder for that person to engage in those activities or changes. So often it involves either a lot of intensive healthcare interventions or family members or loved ones who are helping them do that.
Because I was thinking, because I have friends going through this now, they're putting things in a certain way for this person, for their family member, to make it easy for them to navigate their world and the home and what have you. But then they're not challenged cognitively. And so I was thinking through this, and I wanted to ask you, does it matter at this point? And specifically, I'm talking about this goes here so they can remember it goes, that's where this is, that's where that is. Because you do say the stimulated mind is better where things that are novel and what have you. But when there's a lot of change in their lives, you could see they get confused and it seems like a bad thing, which I assume it is. But I'm sorry for I'm teeing up a bad question here. Should you challenge them at this stage, and how much and how little, or should you not, or just make them comfortable?
So I would argue a bit of both. So one, absolutely, whatever you can do to make them comfortable, help them navigate their world, so it's safe and they can do everything they need to do, I think that's important. So making things easier there is not necessarily a bad thing. But as much as possible, I would also think about how can I engage them in playing games, in physical activity, in reading or lectures or whatever it is, wherever they are on that trajectory, something that works for them to keep them stimulated and engaged. It's probably best to make it separate from
outside of their environment.
Exactly. So they can still navigate the environment and do everything they need to do, but can you get them up and moving? Can you get them playing a game? Can you get them challenging them and stimulating them in other ways that sort of helps to maintain the functions that they have?
Got it. We're almost out of time. Is there anything you want to say that we haven't covered that we should probably either put a period on, or something you want to add?
All of it goes back to mindset, like we had right at the beginning. If you believe this is possible, you believe you can improve things, and you continue to stay engaged and stimulated because you believe it's going to be beneficial, then all the stuff follows on from there.
My last thing, I see all these couples now, they're playing these crossword puzzles or Wordle. I hate them, but I found a game that my wife and I are playing. It's an emoji game where you have to fill in some kind of phrase, but you have to use emojis to figure out what the phrase is. It's fun. We do it together, what have you. When I was reading your book, that maybe crossword puzzles are not that beneficial. Is it beneficial? Because some people are doing these things because they think it's going to help them stay cognitively strong.
So again, multiple potential levels here. The first one being that if you believe something is going to be helpful and you continue to do it, it is probably going to be helpful, right? Beliefs come in even here. But what I meant by what I wrote in the book is that crossword, Sudoku, those kinds of things, they require focus and attention, but they're not really challenging. It's not that they're bad, and they can be nice kind of mental breaks. So it feels good. So you've achieved something, you've been focused on something. All of that stuff is great. I'm not against it at all. It's just that when people are using crosswords as the thing to stimulate their brains as they get older and they retire, I don't think it's going to be enough. That's what I mean. So the game you're playing with your wife sounds great. I want to play it with my wife. And that's it's something you connect over, you have some fun, but you're not going to pretend that it's going to give you all the cognitive stimulation you need to over the next few decades. And that's just the distinction that I was trying to make.
I was going to ask you too. Right here, I'm reading that creatine is good for the brain. I take it for workouts. Is it beneficial for cognitive function?
Potentially.
Yes. It's still still.
So it's
not definitive.
I take it too, and it depends on the scenario. So there's some meta-analyses that show that it's probably more beneficial in older adults, and particularly for memory. So memory is the cognitive function it seems to support the most. It may have some benefits in those with depression, and larger doses may offset some of the negative effects of acute sleep deprivation on cognitive function. So there's still a ton of research to be done. But yes, some potential benefits, particularly if you're stressed or sleep deprived or you're already experiencing some decline.
Okay. Thank you so much, Tommy. By the way, thank you for the book because it's very hopeful. It's very and motivating. It really is.
Great.
I really appreciate it. I want everybody to go check it out and read it. This has been great. Thanks again, man.
Yeah, thank you. I've really enjoyed it.
Well, that's a wrap. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed it, do share it with your friends and on your social platforms. Big thanks to Sam Williams, my audio guy, and the beautiful bumper music you're hearing is Michael Petrovich's Bella Luna. For all my show notes or resource links, visit larryweeks.com, and we will talk again soon.